A commonly asked question in the MBTI community is why there are more sensors than intuitives in terms of population, and whether the distribution is correct or outdated. Aside from intuitives' tendency of being more chronically online to escape the harsh reality of the sensory world, I may have an explanation that has some link to science, and a result of my meta-analysis arrived to an uncomfortable conclusion. The conclusion is that if you're an intuitive, you're genetically predisposed to go extinct. Nature has determined that you're too much of an anomaly that evolution has built in a system for you not to reproduce. You were genetically coded not to make babies. This video will incorporate many recent scientific studies, and I want to be very clear that I am in no fact an expert in any of these fields. I'm just an INTJ that loves the research, so even if you don't agree with my explanation, you're getting an observable glimpse in how deep the INTJ rabbit hole goes when we're locked onto a pattern. Over the course of this video, I'll summarize the theory to explain why there are fewer intuitives compared to sensors. This video is based on Donald Hoffman's 2015 study, The Interface Theory of Perception, and at its core, ITP suggests that overthinkers are less likely to reproduce compared to those that rely on mental shortcuts. Before we dive in, I want to be extremely clear. Everyone has mental shortcuts, and I'll be generalizing stereotypes in this video, but I'm not saying that one personality type is superior to another. I don't believe intuitives are inherently better than sensors. All MBTI types have their own strengths and weaknesses, and if it seems as if I'm favoring one side over another in this video, that's not my intention, that's not the goal. This is just my objective framework from piecing together existing theories. And let's be honest, I'm not an expert, so I might be wrong. This video is going to be very theoretical, and I'll try to explain it as simple as possible. I propose the spicy take that intuitives are genetically not built for baby making, but obviously, that's a general trend, not some universal rule. And we all know personality is way more complicated than just your MBTI type. How you were raised and your life experience matters just as much, maybe even more so. And for the record, there's no actual stats proving sensors pop out more kids than intuitives. Not only will that require tons of research, lots of work that will probably never get approved for grants or funding, but also that's not the point of this video. So if you're an intuitive with tons of baby, great on you. You're actually going against your natural wiring and keeping the intuitives alive. Thank you for keeping us alive. In regards to babies, there have been many studies that suggest that intelligence have a significant genetic component, and that part of it may be hereditary. Although there isn't a single intelligence gene, it is commonly accepted that many inherited genes influence intelligence. And the stance that I'm taking in this video is that intuitive parents pass on the statistical likelihood that their lineage will have intuitive-related gene expression similar to other recessive genes. The way that I understand gene expression is that each person inherits half our DNA from both our biological parents, and we all have the chance of showing something from our lineage, such as red hair, even if it hasn't shown up recently in our family. It's similar to two brown-eyed parents having a child with blue eyes. Just because both parents don't have blue eyes doesn't mean that they didn't inherit blue-eyed genes from their ancestors that can be expressed by their children or their offsprings. The chances are low, maybe near improbable, but still possible. Again, not my field of study, so if you're more knowledgeable than I am, and you want to correct me, please correct me in the comment section below. I won't take offense to it. How gene expressions relate to both ITP and intuitives is the core idea that natural selection optimizes for reproductive success, not truthful perception. And to make that sentence easier to understand, it means that people who sees the truth in the world are less likely to reproduce than people who sees the world in a more simplified interface. The easiest way to explain simplified interface is thinking of it as a computer or a laptop screen. Icons on a screen are literally just icons that represents a file, a function, or an action to be taken. When you open a web browser, you don't fully understand what the web browser is doing, what other systems that is connecting to, how much process it's taking from the computer, the rate at which communication is happening, and many more things. And the beauty is that you don't need to know. As long as the action that you perform on the icon leads to intended results, that's good enough. Humans are complex organisms, but we operate similarly. If you get good grades, you go to college and you make more money. If you wear makeup and dress nicely, you'll have a higher chance of finding a partner. There's so much more nuances that affect each statement, but at its core, doing the first should lead to the second. Although we learn through countless life lessons that it doesn't always pan out that way. Intuitives, by definition, tend to think larger than what we can perceive in our senses, which typically leads us to questioning the status quo. Tying this back to reproduction, the status quo of most society is to work hard without question, find a life partner, and have children which the combination of all three will lead to a very fulfilling life, and in some cases, an even happier afterlife. How this relates to MBTI is that intuitives tend to think or aspire more out of life, which leads to the next core idea of ITP, which is questioning the status quo, or in terms of this study, questioning the definition of perception. There's not a commonly accepted definition of perception, so I'll just provide one principle so that we're all aligned. The Bayesian approach to the term is defined as: we define vision as perceptual interface, the estimation of seen properties from an image or sequences of images. There is insufficient information in the image to uniquely determine the scene. The brain or an artificial vision system must make assumptions about the real world. These assumptions must be sufficiently powerful to ensure that vision is well posed for those properties in a scene that the visual system needs to estimate. For those of you with a monkey brain like myself, I asked AI to explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And it explained to me it as: your eyes guess what things are by looking at pictures, but pictures don't tell the whole story. So your brain fills in the gap using smart guesses. These guesses help you understand what's important, like spotting a cookie when you're hungry or avoiding a road bump when you're driving. Evolutionary speaking, visual perception is only useful if it is reasonably accurate. Therefore, humanity should have evolved our perception toward a more accurate perception of the world. But there's still a fundamental error in that argument, and that natural selection doesn't optimize for accuracy, but instead it optimizes for efficiency or adaptability. The interface theory of perception claims that evolution favors a swift and oftentimes reasonably inaccurate perception, as opposed to a more complex and complete or truthful, accurate portrayal of the world. Furthermore, if deceit is fundamental to communication, such as using trickery to stay safe, we learn how to be tricky or hide stuff from other people, sometimes even from ourselves. This means that our brains don't always show us the truth, because sometimes being sneaky is more helpful than being perfectly honest, which contradicts the conventional view that natural selection favors nervous systems that produce more accurate images of the world, because sometimes it doesn't. It's like telling a partner that their food tastes good, even if it doesn't, or tricking yourself to stay in an abusive relationship. Sometimes the lie is to other people, and sometimes we unknowingly do it to ourselves. So the claim that sensory vision is useful because it is accurate is evolutionarily incorrect, because we're confusing accuracy with efficiency or adaptability, which the paper uses the word fitness. And this research claims that accuracy and fitness are not the same. And as I mentioned earlier, fitness is what evolution prioritizes. Evolution prioritizes raising more offspring as opposed to seeing more of the truth, even if that means lying to ourselves. And my claim in this video is that most intuitives naturally seek to find the truth over living in a sea of lies. Which leads us to the question, what is considered truth in terms of life? The conventional theory to estimate true properties in life is using Bayes' theorem, which is a mathematical rule that updates our belief when we get new evidence. It's as simple as you change your mind when you get new clues. If you notice that a person sneezes when they're sick, you'll wonder if a person is sick if they start sneezing. Bayes' theorem makes sense because we're making prediction based on patterns noticed by our senses. How can we deny something if we're experiencing it in real time? Especially since our current understanding of the world is based on the scientific method, which is fundamentally based on evidence gathered by our senses. The crucial part that gets overlooked by Bayes' theorem is, you guessed it, intuition. Things that are invisible to us are data that we will never obtain. In a nutshell, if our truths are based only on what we perceive from our senses, we're essentially caught in a loop because we are unable to perceive outside the loop. We're living in a bubble. The easiest example is that humanity once believed that the Earth is flat or that the sun orbits Earth. A more modern day example is if you go to a teenager's room and the room is spotless, it's fair to believe that that teenager is a clean person. However, you didn't look in the closet, and in the closet there's a pile of just everything, filth, shoved all in there. Bayes' circle is similar to never looking in the closet and only focusing on the main room. This speculation leads to the overarching question, if perception is not accurate, then what good are they? And the answer ties back to the claim that evolution is not based on accuracy, but instead the ability to adapt to our surroundings. Accuracy is irrelevant if it doesn't solve the issue or is wasted effort for evolutionary problems. Sometimes simplicity wins. But simplified doesn't mean simple, because every interface of every organism has to be simplified to be able to engage with the complex world that we live in. Conventionalists might object that the interface theory of perception is woo-woo territory and it makes the world unknowable and therefore inimical to science, which misses the fundamental point in the philosophy of science, which is that data never determines theories. In actuality, Data never forces a true theory, but instead, we as humans invent cool explanation for the data that we collected. Let's do a quick example. If we let go of an apple from waist height, all of our senses will notice that it falls to the ground. That's the data. Our modern understanding is that it's due to gravitational forces, but others may speculate that there's this giant spaghetti monster using its noodly appendages that pushes it down to Earth. Data doesn't determine theories. We explain the data. The importance of understanding the limitation of interface is that sometimes we're not even aware of our own blindness or our own limitation, leading us to living in a constant loop. The remedy that we currently have to avoid living in a loop is to generate new theories and experimentation that constitutes a scientific method, which in essence is to use our intuition to see things that are invisible to our senses, seeing things closer to the truth. But the issue with a person becoming closer to the truth, as stated earlier in this video, it makes them and their offspring an evolutionary anomaly, and anomalies must be dealt with. The final portion of this video is the data portion of this video that will tie it all together, and it's essentially mathematical game theory. I'm not going to provide that data in this video, so I'll link the article below if you're a numbers nerd. We ain't got time for that here. The results of the game leads to the conclusion that simplicity drives truth to extinction. The more a person spends their life seeking truth, the less likely they are to reproduce. The more likely a person is to accept simplicity or less likely to engage in intuition, the more likely they are to pass on their genes and have children. Again, I want to reiterate that I don't believe that any MBTI type is better than another, but I will be using simplified terms that will categorize groups for the sake of simplicity. Intuitives are not smarter than sensors. We just approach the world in a different manner. The example that I'll be using in this video is to categorize intuitives and sensors into two different categories of bunny rabbits, searching for the best picnic spot within a territory. Intuitive rabbits carefully count every snack that they find at each picnic spot location, which as sensor rabbits decide whether it's a good or bad spot depending on whether they see lots of snacks or not enough snacks. The primary difference is that intuitives take longer to make a decision. They take more time to count each snacks, whereas sensors make a decision based on whether they see enough or not enough. As expected, sensor bunnies usually grab the best picnic spots first if the variety of snacks are easily recognizable. But the intuitives usually get the best spots if the snacks are tricky to determine if it's good or bad snacks. If too many bunnies count, the sensors win. But if there are too many guesses, the intuitives win. Over time in this scenario, sometimes speed wins, sometimes counting wins. So both groups have an equal chance of finding the best picnic spot. But as we all know, life is rarely ever that simple. Let's add some complexity to the game by adding the following variables, such as increasing the number of picnic spots within the territories, increasing the different quantities of snacks, adding a threat of danger that must be considered, increase or decrease visibility, or increase or decrease sophistication of each territory. With the addition of all the variables, there's a clear winner, and it's the sensory bunnies, because their ability to make quicker decisions. Using this simulation allows us to address a natural question. When the bunnies get smarter and the environment gets more complex, shouldn't their senses try to see the world exactly as it is? Is perceptual truth an evolutionary stable strategy? And the answer based on ITP, if you can't already tell, is no. Evolution does not favor truth, but instead efficiency or adaptability. In the case of the bunny picnic scenario, sensor bunnies will eventually overrun intuitive babies. Tying this back to humanity, sensors will have more children compared to intuitives because it's easier for them to make decisions. This may explain our modern understanding of sensors versus intuitive population distribution because sensors have more babies and pass on their likelihood of gene expression. I know I went over a lot in this video, and truthfully, it's a lot to digest, so let me provide a quick summary. Most experts believe that human evolution or natural selection rewards true perception, but the interface theory of perception proposes that it does the exact opposite. Natural selection weeds out the people that are closer to truth and reward people that have simplified interface that shrouds the complexity of the world. Based off Carl Jung's 8-function model, which MBTI is based off of, intuitives tend to seek the truth more often and more naturally than sensors, which means by combining both theories, intuitives are less likely to reproduce and have offsprings. I'm also tying in modern day understanding of genetics and making a bold claim that because intuitives are having less children, genetic expression of genes that makes up an intuitive is becoming less likely than gene expression of a sensor. This may provide an explanation of current day distribution of sensors and intuitives where sensors are overwhelmingly the majority. The final claim that I'm making, which is purely an intuitive leap with no data to support, is because natural selection prefers simplification over complexity. It is in the genetic code of an intuitive to have more reservation in having offsprings for the survival of the human race. Since the perceptual interface of an intuitive adds more barriers when making a decision, intuitives are more likely to hold off on having children or not wanting children at all. Not only are we more aware or concerned of variables that sensors tend to overlook, but also because there's this genetic factor that we're unaware of. And the genetic factor is that our genes know that we're likely to seek out the truth past the interface we inherited, which usually leads to less propensity to reproduce. So if you're an intuitive and you decided that you don't want children, it's probably a decision that was genetically given to you and not your own. Because you're a genetic anomaly, and this is natural selection trying to weed you out of the gene pool. And that's all for this video, folks. Thank you for watching it till the end. This video is actually based on not only the study of ITP, but I learned about the study from this TikToker by the name of No Nonsense Spirituality. She was ex-Mormon, but she has a PhD in theology, and then she related this ITP to theology and why religious will never fully go away. And then my NI is connecting it with MBTI, and it's like, okay, that makes sense as well too. I'll link her channel below because she's honestly one of my favorite TikTok creators. She's very knowledgeable and she teaches me so much whenever I watch her videos. Outside of that too, there was a part of this video that I wanted to bring in how like the next generation, like Gen Z, millennials, and every generation that grew up with internet, we are closer to the truth because we have access to the truth compared to boomers and anyone before that. In most modernized countries, there is a population decline, and then people who are in office, mostly like later Gen X or late boomers, they complain and say we're not having enough children. But for us, we're like, okay, we can't afford to have kids, we can't even afford food, we can't even afford to buy our own house. Why would we do this? So that's also another example of actually seeing the truth. The more you see the truth, the less likely you are to have kids. Within the United States, the last data set that I saw is that reading comprehension average of a 6th grader. So if you're from Appalachia in an area that's lower income, less affluent, you are more likely to have more children than if you are in a more bigger city like New York or something where most people are educated and there's more understanding of how the world influences you, and you're not really relying on like assistance from the government. I know this is a huge topic and I'm pretty sure I missed a lot, but the more I dwell on this topic, the deeper I get in the rabbit hole, the less likely I'm going to make a video, because extroverted thinking won't allow me to state things that I haven't researched and fully understand myself. This isn't all of it. I'm sure you guys can pick little parts of it and say I was wrong, but just consider it. A lot of philosophers that we typically follow either died alone or died horribly without any type of community or any type of offspring. Even Carl Jung himself stated that, and I'm paraphrasing, people who have a better understanding of the world are outcasts, that society doesn't accept us. The suggestion that the closer you are to truth means that you are an anomaly, this isn't new, but we have some type of scientific article to go off of, and I believe in the scientific method, but I also believe in intuition. So I don't know where I am at this point, but I really do have a suspicion, I'm not 100% for this, but I have a suspicion that if you don't want children, like if you're intuitive and you don't want children, or you believe that it's selfish, it was genetically coded into us to think that way. Anyways, that's all from our video. Thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it. Have a happy summer. Bye everyone.